Well, I grew up in small town America, and I never had like a stationary home. Like we were moving around a lot. My dad was in print of books, and that was like a dying industry because of the internet age, right? So it was like 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And then after college, I went back to like some foreign place that didn't feel like home. And I realized like I didn't have any friends and I didn't feel like I could be anything there, you know? So I moved to New York. And my mom, who was an artist herself, always like discouraged me from not being an artist, but like going to art school, maybe like disseminating my work to other people until I felt like I had something to say, until I had like life experience. And I think a lot of people find that to be like sort of a negative, like that's not a very
Yeah.
hopeful idea. But I think the opposite. I feel like artists should be way more precious with their work. We should be like highly considering what we,
Mhm.
our output. And so I kind of waited, until I became a person. And now I'm a new person. So every few years, I guess my vision changes a little, but
Becoming a person. I love that statement. Um, and so the process of becoming a person and finding yourself in New York, because I've had a lot of these conversations where New York ends up being this blank canvas for a lot of people that don't necessarily feel they have a place to land to. And then all of a sudden it's a big city of opportunities with all these networks of crazy cool people who do really good things and who are excited about a bit too many things even at times, but
yeah.
everything's shiny and exciting. And so do you feel that you found yourself a community here in New York that allowed you to express yourself more? Is it like through your force of character and your experience that once you landed in New York, you knew what you wanted for yourself?
No, not in the slightest. But it was the first place that I felt like there was opportunity. And that's definitely not true. That's like hugely diminutive to small town America. There are opportunities, and particularly now,
Mhm.
digitally, you can find a place in the world. But I was like overwhelmed when I came to New York with the possibility. I mean, like it was like you could be a gemologist and you could be, a ballet dancer specifically for, tropical music, or it was just like amazing. So the idea that you could do anything really like for the first time became apparent to me. And for me, anything became something by accident.
Mhm.
I didn't really expect to be a designer. Like I always liked getting dressed. But I had, I guess, taste. A lot of people are very proud of having taste. I think it's like the dumbest thing in the world. Like, but I guess that's because it's second nature to me. Like, I don't find anything that I can do easily to be impressive,
Mhm. That's fair.
So, so yeah, I think I'm like in some ways more of a person who wears clothes than a designer, but that's what makes me a good designer because I know what's out there. I know how to make something that I consider to be better than what exists
Yeah.
currently in the, you know, apparel lexicon. And so, yeah.
Do you remember the first piece you ever designed or the first commission you got for a design? And, would it be something you'd still be as excited today about?
Yeah, I started with vintage tapestry. Like,
Hmm.
I knew that it wasn't, it wasn't percolating in the fashion atmosphere at all to rework clothes. This was like 2017. So I was one of the first that like gained any traction with it. And here, for instance, these are some 1960s Soviet silk velvet, probably tablecloth pieces. Um, so I made something that's somewhat similar when I first started, and it, like I said, it caught on. It was a golden age at that time for Instagram.
Hmm.
Like nobody was a creator; everybody was just like a person who may or may not have had a good idea that was then clouded by a terrible filter. And so I got picked up by like, a couple of random benefactors. And to me now, the quality was horrific. But at the time, I didn't think so.
Yeah, incredible. And so, um, how how important do you think is the roles of like benefactors and potential mentors in like an endeavor like yours? Like when you started and you decided you were going to dive that route, did you have people to help you, or a couple people that you think really helped you out with good advice, good guidance, or is it something that you kind of figured out completely on your own as you evolved in that new role and new capacity for yourself?
Right. I mean, I think mentors are like equally as helpful as they can be dangerous to someone's trajectory, because this is not a business where everybody's path looks the same, and it's also like ever morphing, like the most nebulous business in the world. Trends and technology updates and technology and fabric and sociopolitical atmosphere, and recessions and a million other things. So I had lots of people that were like, telling me what to do in a magnanimous way. They were trying to help, but taking everybody's advice definitely kind of spread me thin for a while. And now I would say, like, if I were to give advice to a designer, I would say do like two things well and don't try to do more for maybe forever, but at least for years. Yeah.
So we have the influence of reworking noble materials that we don't want to get discarded into beautiful, fashionable items. What was your transition into the world of jewelry?
Well, jewelry was partially because I wanted to make easy money, and that is an industry that allows for that and is also like sustainable by proxy of the fact that it's just not like, I mean, clothes are so much worse. To me, like jewelry by comparison is like seashells. It's metal, and clothes, the processes that it goes into are just like incredibly inherently unsustainable and often um have slave labor. And I wanted to do something that was both lucrative and creatively satisfying and like 100 times easier. And it's funny because like I've met a lot of jewelry designers that like I tell that to, and they're like, oh no, this is a very tough industry. And being somebody who does both, I'm like, I bet, but oh my God, like this one puts you through the ringer. Like fashion is really, really hard in the clothing sense. So jewelry was like a breath of fresh air,
Yeah.
It's
And for your designs, do you approach jewelry in a similar way that you would approach your fashion, or do you process that differently when you go into a planning stage? Because I feel there's some echoes between like the beautiful colors, the whimsicality, and the beautiful textures that you include in a lot of the things that you produce. And it almost feels like there could be a similar process, but I would love to hear that from you.
well, so clothing, I am like a textile forward person. My mom was a textile designer, and for me, like the hallmark of sustainability first is like making something that doesn't exist. And then it's all the other parts, like, making it ethically and making it with sustainable material. But to me, like a brand like Everlane isn't sustainable, even though maybe the processes behind it are. But just by virtue of the fact that, it's here, we already have that stuff.
Mhm.
So for me, like starting at ground zero and building from a amazing textile, that's like my first, I don't know, prompt. Like, if somebody was like, oh, just make art, you'd be
Mhm.
like, what? That's too broad. So textile both gives me like a direction and a purpose, and kind of then figures the rest of the equation out really quickly, because the fabrics I use are really hard to work with. So usually when I see a textile, I like immediately know what it's got to be. You know, it's not like these are not isotropic patterns, meaning they're pictorial mostly. You know, so you have to like figure out what the placement is
Like,
going to
how
be.
do
And
they end up looking once they're all stitched
Exactly.
together? So they
Yeah.
line up nicely.
So they
and-
line up nicely, right? And like, you know, people will always be like, "Why don't you make bags with this?" And it's like, what bag am I going to make? You know. So yeah, clothes for me are very prescriptive, actually. And then with jewelry, it is similarly that I want to make something I've never seen before, but that would probably be the process is probably reversed. I start with like, you know, the concept and then I choose the materials after.
Yeah, amazing. And so talking about arts and inspiration, is there particular areas of the world that you look to for inspiration for what you do these days?
Sure. You know, I make things with color and I'm really into velvets and silks. Like everything I make kind of has like an iridescent quality. So Italy has always been a favorite of mine. These like Italian wedding blankets that I like to use, they're gifted to the bride and groom on their wedding day and they're really floral and just like amazing looking. And I also work a lot with like Turkish and Uzbek fabrics. I mean, I suppose it will probably continue to expand over time, but my interests usually lie in like florals and folk art and folklore, you know, things
Any
like that.
specific time periods that you seem to get drawn to, or that's more for texture, iridescence, and quality to materials that you're looking for?
Past the 60s and 70s, like a lot of textiles are, you know, lose their
Yeah, quality.
yeah. So I'm usually in that era. But I also like I think it's like a big misconception about me that I only work with vintage materials. It's not true at all. I mean, I also work with some new materials like my linings and things like that have
course.
to be new. And they're also, by the way, just in case anyone was wondering and wants to stop patronizing me because of this fact, they are often not made out of anti-synthetic materials. There is polyester in some of my linings, so I just want to make that clear. However, my thing is like at this point, I'm making 99.9% of my clothes out of vintage and artisan made materials, and there is like a cap on my ability to succeed with that because you know you can't make thousands.
Yeah.
So
For your artisanal fabrics and the people that you work with that do create at that quality today, how did you find these vendors? Like, how do you find people who still have that craft, and how do you go about researching if they would be the right fit for your brand?
well, I think that a lot of times people wonder how much you buy a fabric for and why you price it at what you price it. And it's not just the idea that like you're trying to get a 4 times markup or an 8 times markup from cost. It's more the idea that you spent your entire life learning about what is possible, and that kind of mistake making costs you untold thousands of dollars. So there's been so many times where I buy something that like is like completely unusable, and I would say like that's like 1 out of 2 or 3, you know. And now that so then I start to like look for specific things within a fabric world, and I start to understand like the benchmarks of what a quality fabric will be. But that's why usually like within a year I only adopt like 1 or 2 new specialty fabrics because yeah, there's a lot of learning curve.
Yeah, and testing it and
Yeah.
making sure everything.
I don't even, nobody else is using it. So, and there's a reason usually.
And to open up on a little, similar theme, do you think there's people in our age category of the new generation that are actively trying to accomplish what you accomplish? And do you think it's something that's being a bit more mindful in the industry at a whole, at large? Or is it something that should be still pushed to the forefront in terms of like responsible production, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, yeah, definitely Gen Z has got their finger on the pulse with this. Fashion houses, like, yes, also, there's a huge difference between doing what I do and sort of like, I mean, I don't have the certifications that something like Allbirds does from their factories. I'm more like, think that I know my vendors. I go and visit my sample room every few days. But for me, it's more of like a small maker situation. And I think that that's something that exists also on Instagram, that like more and more people are just becoming creators, X makers. And I think that's the way to go. It's like only direct to consumer now. I think wholesale is a really huge risk unless you have funding. And when I say funding, I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I don't mean hundreds of thousands of dollars once. I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars season over season over season for years. And then probably some after that. So, yeah.
And so I really like the point you made with like the direct to consumer, because we feel we were born in the same era, the big, like towards a bit too old to be the young ones on Instagram, a bit too young to be the first ones on internet, and like in a bit of that weird gray area, things
Right.
were starting to define themselves. And like if you were given the opportunity to kind of start your journey over again today, do you think there's one or two key points that you would have done differently for yourself?
Definitely. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't have done it at all. I am very lucky to be in the position that I am now, having like fought through as many years as I did. But I would definitely say that I like put myself into a little bit of a gilded prison for about 5 years. And I wish that I had had the strength probably to get out before this point. I do think that it's something that if you're trying to chase the traditional route of fashion, as in notoriety within the downtown pantheon, fashion week, wholesale, that kind of thing, I think that you can like kind of say goodbye to your like faith and money and stability, both economically and sometimes mentally, because it's truly like it's not something that works. Like really for no one does it work. I have sort of been able to weather the storm because I'm a product-based business at the end of the day, although I've tried all of those to fulfill all of those metrics, being involved in fashion in the traditional sense, but I still made things based on the idea that I thought I could sell them. Creating collections, that kind of thing. It's been a dead idea for years, and even then, I think it was probably just an obfuscated concept that people did not understand, like the machinations of. And so, personally, like when I began my career, I had no idea what I was getting into, and I had some unbelievable breaks where like I'd make 100 grand in 2 days because some celebrity wore it, and then that would happen again, but it doesn't stick. And so if I were to give any advice to a newcomer or somebody who wants to go to fashion school, it would be start a business online, on Instagram, make something again, make a new thing until you find something that people like, and then make that in 3 colors and continue slightly augmenting from there, introducing stuff very slowly. And that's, I think, where you find your profit, unless, like I said, you're probably
Unless you're finance-based,
and
et
I'm really
cetera, et
talking about
cetera,
like
like private
millions. Yeah.
equity-based, et
Yeah,
cetera,
yeah.
et cetera.
Which doesn't exist, by the way. Like I was definitely under the impression that there would be some tech tycoon that would be like, I really want to back the next hot young thing in fashion. And maybe there was like a 3-year window around like just before Bitcoin where that may have been true, but it's definitely not true anymore. And I would say like 99.9% of people who do get funded is friends and family. And I don't think that people are open enough about that. So it leads you to believe that you have like a chance. And I think that chance is very, very slim. So anyway, that's all to say. Get started in jewelry and don't do wholesale. And yeah.
No, but so do you have hope that, with what you just said and what we're seeing on social media, that, young creators and people who have ideas now are actually actively trying to not be part of these bigger systems? And I feel that if we walk on Canal Street today, there's a bunch of independent stores that aren't big corporations backed. And so are you hopeful there's a chance that the young generation will awake to a more boutique consumerism where we're back to going to the mom and pops or friends and family shops?
Yes, definitely. And that's also the only way to survive. I don't mean though brick and mortar, but what I do mean is like, you know, uh, direct to consumer single owned businesses, you and a partner, you and your friend. Um, that's, I think, the only way in this landscape
Mm,
to scale. And you do also have to have a good idea. I mean, branding is actually most of it. I've spent almost all of my career refusing to brand myself. I don't really know why, because I could do it for anyone else in a second. But I think I had like some weird lack of confidence. I mean, in some ways, I'm like the least confident person in the world. And in other ways, I'm like just intolerably uh, sure that I'm incredible at this or that. But you do have to have a good idea. However, making something that people believe in by talking about it in a way that you believe in is like probably the most surefire way to success now. Cult of personality, but authentic cult of personality.
authentic cult of personality. I like that. We're going to take a little moment to appreciate this wonderful space we're in. And can you tell us a bit more about your story here on
Sure.
Orchard Street, iconic street?
Oh yeah, best street, by the way, for retail if you are a New Yorker and you want to make money. Lots of like great young patrons. The customers are amazing. I decided I wanted a brick and mortar because online felt so pernicious in terms of the seasonality and things like that. And I also make things that people want to touch and feel. So that was incredibly gratifying to begin with. And I thought that I was going to be the richest girl in the world when I started. And then winter came, and then I pretty much tired of the whole thing pretty quick. So, point would be, I think if you're breaking even at a store, you're doing an amazing job. But if you don't like going to work every day and basically working in customer service or you do not have the money to not do that, I would not recommend it. But like I said, great experience, and I'm glad I did it now before, time got away from me. I decided to have kids, and then I was like, let's open a store. Yeah, I can touch a lot more people online, and realistically, actually, like making a scene, making a vision, which is sort of what I've done here, but I did it. It's done.
Yeah.
I'm not going to rearrange, the racks on the wall every 2 weeks. Making a vision like with photography and art direction and things like that, that's where my interest lies. So I'm glad to be moving more online, like thinking more about social media and world building, as they say in video games.
And big fan of video games here, no problems there. But so in your world building, you have a pretty striking visual identity on your socials. And like, so what's your approach to, I see a lot of up close, pretty personal portraiture in general in the work. And how do you want to build your world? What's the vision to build a world online?
It's a good question. I think it like goes back to, I don't know, like I hate to say it, but like taste. Like I don't
Mm,
think at all about what I'm doing. Like at all. It's like, I mean, like I literally design something and it's done within 10 minutes. I like decide what I'm gonna do with a photo and it's immediately finished. Like I don't have a whole lot of forethought, to be honest.
mhm.
Like I do in the sense that like it takes me months to source fabric and things like that. But one thing that I think I'm like really obsessive about is not contributing to like the din of like mediocre stuff that like people have to wade through on social media. I almost think it's like rude, especially for like a creator to make something that's like substandard because I know how I feel, which is like tired to the point of bedragglement when I scroll social media, which I can't not do because it's we're in the age that we are, and I don't come across anything like substantial. So I guess part of my world building is just like, I don't know, creating something good. um, and again, like it's like I'm on social media all the time. I am like a connoisseur of like vintage fashion and today's fashion, and so it's like almost easy for me to know what I should and shouldn't be doing in order to like capture something new. Um, so yeah.
Any final words for us? If you had, three random statements that you've overheard in your careers that left like the biggest impressions on you. Three,
Mm.
or let's start with two. Two random sentences that stand out.
Mm, that's not the look is something I've been told a lot of times. Like from PR or from brand consultants, it's just like that's not how it's done. Like, that's like for instance, this interview. This is not something that like any publication would run. There's going to be like the whisperiest whistleblowing statement in there, but generally speaking, they don't want to publish stuff about me being overly negative. And so I think the idea for so long has been to like basically lie about what it's really like, or like, I mean, I just don't care anymore, and that's amazing. Like, I feel also like people are responding to me better because now
You're free.
I'm free. Yeah. And I'm saying things that other people are thinking, but that's not the look has been a big echo for the last few years. Another one has been like concentrate. Concentrate is like my number one thing. I've done a million different things in this industry. And not only have I realized, and I knew it from the jump, like I don't like a lot of them. Don't do stuff you don't like. There's going to be so many parts about this job that you're going to hate already naturally. So don't do anything like, don't put more stuff into the mix that you don't like. Second of all, like you literally do not have the time and money to test every single theory. You need to just, whatever your thing is, if it's direct to consumer and Instagram, then it's that. If it's, I don't know, there's others, that's mine. But just like newsletters, for instance, most underrated way to get your brand noticed, but you can't do all of them. So I would say focus is one of them. And the other one would be like, be fearless in terms of your point of view. Um, yeah, because people will respond to that far more than probably anything else you
Amazing advice.
do.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing your next steps in your new ventures. We'll be watching carefully.
Thank you so much.